Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a very exciting day every year with the Animo releasing the new vintage of Thorne Daughters wines. So this is the 10th vintage of Thorne Daughters. For those who don't know, this is John Seccombe. He's the Thorne in the Thorne Daughters. Before we get into it, I think it's probably worthwhile maybe reflecting on Thorne Daughters as a project, maybe 10 years in.
Yeah.
Maybe how did you get started and what's been the transition to get us to this point?
You know, yeah, it's hard to believe that 10 years have crept up on us very, very quickly. We had 2 infant daughters when we started, and we kind of jumped off a cliff and started making our own wines. So I started out in rented cellar space. Chris Arlight was a neighbor, and he offered me a space to make, I think, probably 11 barrels in the first vintage. So yeah, we started with 2 wines in 2013, and and 10 years has gone by very quickly. There's a lot of work gone in, a lot of water under the bridge. It's been a hell of a journey and a hell of a learning space for us. It was obviously the first time we made our own wines. I made wines for other people for 15 years, and then you suddenly sit with a blank slate for your own wines, and you have to come up with the goods. So it's been challenging and invigorating and daunting at times. But I think, we set out to make wines that we felt reflected the kind of zeitgeist of what was going on in South Africa when we started. We wanted wines which had a strong South African identity, which played off the legacy of old vines that we have in South Africa, that embraced modernity as well. So I think we really wanted to ride this line between working with sort of old school methods, old school vineyards, but bringing a bit of modern polish to the wines. So I think those of you who know the wines will see, we've got a very clean, polished aesthetic, but at the same time, classic and understated. So I think we really want to celebrate the vineyards that we work with, and do an absolute justice to those. So, and I think, I hope 10 years along that you'll agree with me that we're doing justice to the vineyard parcels that we work with.
Talk to me about the phrase embracing modernity.
Yeah, so I think not making wines that are super rustic or faulty in some way. I think we've got a very clean, precise aesthetic. And I think while we still work with natural fermentation, work as naturally as possible in the vineyard, so I think, but without embracing faults,
Yeah. And you're saying you want to embrace sort of the heritage of the Cape.
Yeah.
Is that why you mostly make white wines? Because they're the older vineyards in the Cape? Or?
Yeah. Look, and I would love, I'd love to say that we've got a lot of old red vineyards in the Cape, and and unfortunately, just with leaf roll virus and the state of vineyards, there's not a lot of great old red vineyards. So I think naturally our old white vineyards are a more available resource. But I think part of embracing modernity as well is we work with a lot of young vineyards, and we're seeing a lot of incredibly well executed plantings of clean, beautiful vine material. So, I think we have a great future where, people are establishing vineyards now with a 50-year vision. If you talk to someone like Rosa Creer, we now have 50 to 100-year vision for planting vineyards. So, I think that's what's exciting about South Africa. We're really straddling that legacy of old vines, and while looking forward to a very bright future with, incredible plantings.
And it seems to me that also the reasons for planting is different now. They're planting for quality rather than necessarily. I mean, a lot of the vineyards back in the mid 1900s were planted for quantity more than quality. So
And I think we see the legacy of that in a lot of the old farms that we work with. There was a lot of grapes were a crop on bigger farms, so there wasn't necessarily. They were not planted with high quality wines in mind, and we're just very lucky that we had workhorse varietals like Clarke and Shannon that are now producing incredible old vines, old vineyard wines. But I think nowadays it's become so expensive to plant that anyone who's planting vineyards needs a solid plan, you know what I mean? And I think, we would love to plant our own vineyards, and I think there's a lot more honesty about what works in places. It was, I think back in the day, someone would say, I want to plant grapes. They'll go to the co-op marketing director and say, what should I plant? And he'll say, Chardonnay cells, Cabernet cells, plant those. in the oddest places. I mean, we're working now quite a lot up in the Skurfberg, and there's Merlot planted up in the Skurfberg, and I'm not sure that we're going to see very interesting Merlot coming out of the Skurfberg in the near future.
It's not going to lead a Merlot Renaissance?
No,
No?
unfortunately not. But if you ask the growers why they planted that, Merlot was something that co-ops could sell. The varietal is a brand.
So it was all market-driven rather than terroir-driven, for example. Yeah, okay.
And I think now, if you talk to, at one stage we were buying grapes from Donny Carinas and Stellenbosch, and Donny was saying, in his dad's day, you asked the co-op or SFW or, whoever was buying what they would buy and you just planted that. He said, whereas now they're looking at citrus, they're looking at, a lot of different options on the hectareage to make the farm work. So, he said vineyard needs to be a much more solid proposition. So, yeah, there's got to be a quality focus. Okay. Look, unless you're on the Orange River and then you plant what's productive and you harvest 30 tons a hectare, and that's, and that fills that need, But I think a lot of the areas that we're working with... That's sort of
more commodity wine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you're just making a Chardonnay or a Cabernet, whereas you want to make Thorne Daughters wines, which, with a unique philosophy and...
Exactly.
And hopefully we'll be the judge of a level of quality, perhaps.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Exactly, yeah. Horses for courses.
Of course you may.
If you could plant any variety, if you plant, what would you plant?
It's very loaded.
Pinot Noir and Chambertin. Perfect.
Yeah, 1 hectare Chambertin, not asking a lot. No, I do have my eye on a parcel higher above the Himmelnade Ridge, if I could stretch to that. And then, Pinot and Chardonnay are proven there, but then if we were to buy something in the Swartland, you'd have to be honest about the terroir, So I think that's the main thing. I think, you can have the things that you're passionate about, but I think shoehorning them into the wrong place is setting yourself up to fail. And, vineyard's such a long-term investment that, I think you have to be really honest about that, No, look, I do love Pinot and Chardonnay. I love working with them. That's fantastic. But then, I think the opportunity I've had in South Africa, and, I think, when I came back and we started our thing, we had access to, these wonderful old vineyards. And, that's been an incredible journey. And, but then to put down roots in a place and start farming, that's a different proposition.
And 2022, I mean, all the wines we're going to taste are 2022. What was that vintage like?
Yeah, no, I think we're seeing sort of anecdotally our odd number vintages are, quite upfront and pleasing. I think it was a very challenging vintage in that we went from a very wet early growing season to a very hot January. So we saw a lot of disease pressure in the beginning, then followed by water stress during harvest. So it was quite frenetic. But I think we may, like every year, we have to do the work and put in the right decisions. And I like to think, just based on experience with all of our blocks and what we're doing, that we made the right decisions, and I think made some pretty smart wines.
Well, I mean, we're going to taste the wines just now in terms of characteristics, but in terms of overall characteristics of the vintage, what are we looking for, do you think?
Yeah, I think the wines at this stage, they're a little bit less austere than the 21s. I think 21 was more of a winemaker's vintage. I think very concentrated and tight wound, really good acidities. I think 22s acidities are notched down. The wine's a little bit open and more up front, so I think just as a generalization.
And maybe a bit more generous, perhaps, or?
Yeah, I think generous up front. For me, the 21, I would like to do a 5 or 10 year reevaluation, and my gut feel is 21 would be a vintage that will really go the long distance, just in terms of power and concentration. But I think the 22s now, have an immediate charm, which is fantastic.
Cool, awesome. I notice here that there is no Wanderer's Heart on the list. Where is that?
So we've made the decision now just to hold back our reds a little bit longer. I'm seeing we'll taste the Copper Pot Pinot later, and I think an early release on the Pinot seems to be working really well. But I think with the Wanderer's Heart, with the Syrah in particular, I'm finding that's needing a little bit more time. So yeah, look, financially for a young winery like us, it's a big decision to hold something back, but we're finally getting into a space where we can sit on our reds for a little bit longer. So yeah.
So is that a change of style, or just a change in release date, or a bit of both?
Yeah,
or?
I think having the bigger Syrah component in there has definitely made the wine denser and more serious.
Okay.
We are doing much longer macerations, up to 45 days now, so the wines are very tightly wound. And yeah, they're just taking a little bit longer to get into a good space. And obviously work very closely with Marilise at Memento, and I can see the difference. She's just releasing that sort of 6 to 8 months later on her reds, and it makes an enormous
right.
difference.
Yeah.
So I'm getting Syrah from Gabrielskloof on the shale portion, and then from Olifantsberg as well on shale. Yeah.
Cool. And we had a brief access to a new label called Menagerie.
Yeah.
Maybe just chat to us about that little project briefly.
Yeah. So I mean, part of part of what we do is explore and experiment. That's kind of ongoing. And Marilise and I often jump in the bucky and go and look at the vineyards, and we call it a shopping trip because people offer us things and neither of us can say no. And then, so people approach me with things that may or may not fit in with what we do or become, or we experiment around the edges of what we're doing. So it took me a long time to find very good blocks of Chardonnay. And I've slowly accumulated a few more vineyards of Chardonnay. So one of the Menagerie wines that would be more regular is from 2 high altitude blocks in Ceres and Picanierskloof. That's working super well to keep that as a single vineyard under Menagerie. And then there's other little bits. We did some Pinotage from Skirfberg, Vermentino from Stellenbosch. So there's some one-offs. There's a little Chenin Pet Nat that my Champenois Mathieu had a guy out from Champagne, and he wanted to make some Chenin Pet Nat. So we agreed. So we've got a bit of that. Yeah. So we like to explore through that, but make very small parcels on that.
So a mixture between R&D projects and just sort of alternative projects.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Exactly.